Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast about Mine, the Apple Podcast Store, wherever you go to get podcasts. Or you can get it at the business www.business.com. I'm Leon Gettler. My job is to review business, finance, and bring it all to you every week. For the most aggressive customers around the world, subscribe to Talking Business on my website, leongettler.com, or whatever your favourite podcast. This is episode 38 of 2025. Today's Friday, October 31st. First, I'll be talking to Dino Beverakis, who is Managing Director of Avaya. We'll discuss the future of hardware accessibility and how organisations stay compliant. And I'll be talking to Dino topic about the upstate of Australian employment, or Australia's growing job market for the RBA, and the state of the economy. First, Dino.
Well, Dino, there's been a lot of questions about accessibility and stuff like that. What's the guys' show?
Well, it's not the Avaya release, but we take a look at what some of the large Uber and for example are arrangements with the place.
The first thing we made was organic flour, but that really connection issues really impacting employee engagement. But then, we went to the next step. We evaluated role, and it's a pure analogy, which was the first organic launch in the Southern Hemisphere. Really, hooked into that, the marketing was quite easy. We in 2003, we put chocolate around that. We did organic chocolate. So we really enjoyed that. It's about it.
So it's organic chocolate?
Yes, it is. And the very interesting thing about chocolate is it's the most sprayed food. And the only thing that compares is tobacco. So therefore, it makes a lot of sense to have organic chocolate. It grows in a rainforest and removes some of those policies.
You and I come from a different era, and I know it goes back to the way
they do. And look, the part of it is the trees. Part of the agriculture is the trees. They grow conventionally too close together, and it harvests the pests. So if you grow a little bit further apart, it's a lot better.
The digital tools
I suppose I'm not sure what that contains things like colours.
So I think it's going to be
unadvertising
rolled
food.
now.
Look, the main thing is the residues from the chemicals that are put on and the pesticides. So you've got three levels of chocolate.
There are ramifications or consequences if
the bottom is the chocolate that typically be a used or something like that. That is artificial colour, artificial flavour, just with hydrogenated oils. Then you've got compound chocolate, which was a lot of that in Australia, and that's where you do have the cocoa mass.
When you look at the zines and those hydrogenated oils, which are very bad.
And then at the top of the tree, you have curvature chocolate or European style that uses the cocoa mass. It's hard to work with because it has to be tempered and things like that, but they're the three levels. So at the top of the tree, you've got obviously a better chocolate, a little bit different.
So you use this in regional Australia.
It's good. There's a certain amount of disadvantages, like we're so dependent on.
We're just going to have to work.
So we've got things like that. Our services are poor, but we have some incredible advantages. I find that the price of land and buildings, the supply of quality employees reflect that it's not too many. And I don't know, you have to run a business in the country, you have to have a bit of integrity. There aren't as many people around here. But I love to see Australia
and you run the business with your daughter?
Yes,
What's that like?
it's good. We spend nearly 7 days a week together, and doesn't always work for people. I've heard stories, but we certainly get along. She's very honest and tells me when I'm being dumb and so that works all right. As long as you're big enough to accept it. We don't always agree. That's when it's wholesome.
So what happens when you disagree?
We have a discussion, Leon. We work through it, and yes, I think we're both big enough to agree. And even if it's the next day, you come back and you go, all right, this is where I think it's at. But she'll tell me things like, and this is great for an old 60-year-old like me. She'll tell me things like, Dad, just like actually in business, Neil, using a some work and doesn't mean right now, and I think 85 years you provide so that's overwhelming me because you start a great apps can slow them down, and they've been looking for a secondary option, and that opens visibly improving.
Well, tell us about your market. What is your market?
Okay, we've got two different markets. We've got the wholesale market, and that's where we sell to upmarket delicatessens and organic fruit and veg stores and really organic. And therefore, the customers there are people, and we did a bit of a survey on them. I thought they were buying a product because they weren't getting chemicals. The number one reason they're buying a product, other than liking to eat it, is that they want to save fun. It's a very, very big push. Nobody wants to be like, they can eat meat, they can make prior for another, they're the people that are concerned about data, but also they know that data is quality chocolate purely just so they use the ability of fruit. So that's one market. The other one people that visit here, and to be honest, very education goes great customer service, and leaders pay attention to what government do our local or less care that sort of thing. So that's a totally different organisation. But
chocolate eaters, people.
Well, 97% of the Western world actually reflect on here and pretty broad brush. Licorice, yeah.
It's very important all out.
Something that doesn't right, something that feels the right suit. And people my age, that's very engaged. That's people my daughter's age. They education and understanding find your organisation as work within. They're looking for sorts of things. So I think around about
how would that education process take place? What would actually happen? How would you do it?
How would you do it? Obviously, I'm not a cater, right? But from a leadership perspective, I think it starts at the leadership board is actually one of the biggest building immune system educating. And incidentally, in 2013 when SARS disease came out, it was the only thing just covering what those things are. Yeah, so the licorice eaters, they're a small group, they're quite passionate, and they're looking for good licorice. They're looking for an old-fashioned licorice. Well, absolutely. Start at SLT, you incorporate the board and conversation. I get more and more sales on site.
So where do you see
connect up? We have another company that in Corowa, we make whiskey there, and we also do education and chocolate, selling it down there with those areas, value-added people are going to understand more about what it means. That's where it's very easy. Also selling to the wholesale to get places on meeting the public. I think places will go away. Giving people a good time, which in a way, when times are great, we want international people, but also when times are tough and the economic rates are down a little bit, rather than provide a little escape.
That would take some time.
For people to go and
it does
enjoy
everything
they
takes
can.
time. So it's about
and agritourism would be quite an area to get.
Yeah, so when we've done the studies on the Riverina, that's sort of the strength of the river. Some of the greatest production of agriculture is happening in this area. It's a really interesting way. The 5 richest wine families are 5 richest wine families in Australia. The majority of your citrus in Australia.
Okay, well,
Things like that. So I think it's the food
Thank
bowl
you very much.
of Australia. It's the highest producing area.
Callum, honey grows 1.5%. What's your view of
Interested in
was a bit of a surprise. I don't think anyone in the market we jump 4.5%. But that said, it was also something that was likely to happen going forward over the next few months. We had experienced a slowdown in employment growth over the course of 2025, and it was always clear if that continued that we would see a spike in employment rate. It's just come at a time.
That's right, Leon. I think it's become a very close one. I think
that's right. So we did see employment gains of 14,000 people in the month of September, which is not a wrong result, not a terrible result. But when we take a step back to 2025, we can see that it's increased by 116,000 people. By comparison, over that period last year, we were up 303,000. And over the same period before that, 2023, we were up around 300. So you can see just how much recent 2025 has been to the previous 2 years. Now, growth of that nature is not the pace with growth in Australia.
We think there's still a chance.
Our working age population has increased by 2% over the past year compared to 1.3% employment. So when you have dynamics like that, what ultimately happens is that it was
2.7%.
and that's precisely what we saw in September. What we've got to be concerned about going forward, though, is if employment growth doesn't pick up,
so it's a fairly close call.
We're going to see this population continue at some point because Australia's population growth is so strong, driven by immigration, of course, but we're not seeing strong economic growth at the moment.
The timing of that is
quite acute. So what means
well, it gives them more to think about heading into the
money market numbers have moved around a lot.
Recently, the boosted by the November inflation, and understandably so,
6% sharp
by that in the past, but they've also got to be
70%
concerned the labour world conditions that it is, and they're visibly they didn't expect the unemployment rate to rise this high, this fast. They thought the rate might be around 3% by the end of the year. So they need to revise their thinking.
A rate cut fully priced in, according to the money market.
Given what we are seeing in jobs at home, particularly given the risk of unemployment rates further, I think that might be sufficient to change the policy. I think they want to make rates based on inflation.
In other words, the
job market may be for them to cut again.
Would you agree with that?
Well, the economy has been soft for some time. One of the strange things over the last years has been that the job market has been strong. The economy has been weak. Now, there was always an expectation at some point when the economy transferred to a much weaker job market. It seems like that is currently happening.
Which would perhaps
there are still some measures
that's right. It's a sort of somewhat uncertain thing because the jobs thing
for example, on Indeed, we see a lot of job creation, jobs above academic level. So there's a little bit of a disconnect at the moment between what we're seeing on the side of things, which is obviously quite weak, versus what we're seeing regarding job vacancies remain quite strong. Now, typically we would consider job vacancies to be future employment, right? They're jobs that need to
continuing to soften.
Will we that translates into
the
a
jobs
job down the line? But that relationship is growing recently. It's unclear why that's the case. Speculated about it, it's unclear exactly why that's the case. But again, it's something that continues. Employment growth doesn't pick up. Then we're going to see
it's hard to rule out there being another
That
cut
would
or
be
two,
quite a concern,
because
wouldn't it?
I think the economic data we get
Absolutely. One of the reasons why
recovery,
we
slowing jobs
managed
growth,
to, I
and
guess,
probably
survive the cost of living crisis was because the job market was so strong. Yes, it was very difficult for most households, but most of us had jobs, and that enabled us to deal with it. If we're entering a phase where the job market is much weaker, employment rate is maybe 5% higher, then that dynamic shifts. It's much more difficult to deal with higher inflation if the job market held that health. So that could definitely feed into a more challenging environment. Households going back spending that. So it's definitely something to be concerned about. And I think traditionally concerns about may outweigh their concerns that they have around inflation.
Well, my
back down again to the economy around 15%, the average tariff going to the US.
That's been a big problem for a while. Businesses in Australia is terrible. Businesses are very poor at the moment, and understandably so. They are operating in a very unpredictable economic environment. Trading environment makes it very difficult to plan ahead, and that can include things like headcount decisions, but it can also include investments as well. Now, an economy that doesn't invest, it doesn't have a strong business investment environment, is one that over time probably 7% well. And I think that's probably an issue Australia's had much of the past decade. Businesses haven't been investing that much, and one of the consequences of that, as you know, productivity volatility. Has been pretty shocking in Australia for some time.
Indeed, but we'd also say that
Trump saying China almost saying
public sector
will work something out.
I
think what you're saying from both China
etc.
is a bit of negotiating positioning, brinkmanship ahead of
the public sector certainly has papered over some cracks that have China's private sector. The healthcare industry has been growing over the past or so. And a lot of that has been due to the expansion of the population. Now, one of the reasons why employment has been much slower next year is because organisations, companies in the healthcare sector are not employing as many people as they were before. So they're not expanding their headcount like they have been for years. And such has been the dominance of health insurance recently. That by itself changing one issue has been enough to bring Australian employment growth down to the levels that we're currently seeing. So the private sector has managed to pick up that slack as the healthcare sector is slow. So that's obviously highlighting that the job market economy is quite robust as may have
taken fright at his latest poll,
particularly some of the very strong gains
put pressure on states around Texas and 23 man. So if the healthcare sector doesn't return, I'm not saying that it can't, because there's still a lot of demand for jobs as well. But quite clearly, Trump is
certainly doesn't seem like the private sector is
Republican control of both houses of Congress,
despite all the skills shortages we have.
That's right. And this is also part of the dynamic. So
seeing here,
I mean, I speak to a lot of clients sector. I know they have jobs that they want to do, but in some cases they are struggling to find suitable talent for those roles. So there is also a little bit of a mismatch between the skills that employers are looking for and skills that are not in the at the moment. We're also seeing demand transform. Obviously, AI is the
well, that's right, and most polls actually
in general maybe some
Republicans and Trump,
but it's a really
Democrats are playing a role though,
because
there's still a lot of the Senate, which means that some things, including this funding government, with 60 votes.
Hopefully, ideally, they turn around some of those jobs. Fill employment growth is up,
one senator
down.
That's
That's
the
Goldilocks version of this, but we're not seeing no upward movement in employment
to get a budget through,
and that's important.
Reopen government. But in any case, the Americans, president polls,
it certainly does. It's clear that recruitment remains very difficult for Australian businesses. There's still
help
find it
because
quite difficult.
one big
And this appears to be the job market
Medicare subsidies, which would mean many Americans will see their health costs
because there are still a lot of
go
options
up
out there for those who want to take any job for them.
So that's
where the Democrats are coming from, and they're probably thinking, well, things are going okay for us, we're not getting all the blame.
Thank you very much for your time.
So what's happening in the meantime? Trump is saying, let's start the government, we're going to start laying people off, which apparently they've started to do. Furloughed those who aren't furloughed, told to stay home, just don't get paid. If you're an air traffic controller, you show up and work, you do your job, you're going to get paid. A great inducement for confidence. Americans flying at present. But in any case, he's now actually starting to lay some in areas that they don't regard as Republican priorities. And so that adds to the risk here, because if he's laying people off, then it could mean the shutdown could have more of an economic impact than would normally be the case. Because normally, what activity didn't happen is just made up for later when it gets their pay. That's at risk now, so therefore you can see more of an impact here. So this is all occurring, the tariff flare-up with China, the shutdowns, could all cause a bit more volatility in markets, and share markets have had a good run through the recent months, particularly in the US, August, September, strong again. That has left valuations a bit stretched and vulnerable to bad news, which arguably the markets are starting to get a little bit nervous about, particularly with the tariff flare-up, but the shutdown operating in the background.
Well, shutdown, you've got paychecks and the drop-down in government services.
It will reverberate through the economy, but there's been something like 20 partial shutdowns. So what happens in America when they actually have a shutdown? It's only non-essential workers or non-essential roles that are furloughed. So the Postal Service has its own funding. Many other US governments have their own funding. US departments have their own funding, so they keep going. But areas like national parks, civil staffing national parks, and monuments in the US, a collection of government statistics, often regarded as non-essential, and therefore those things have been ceased. So currently speaking of the about 2.3 million federal workers in the US, there's about 700,000 additional Postal Service workers, so in total it's about 3 million workers. You've only actually affecting about 750,000 of those in total. And so the economic impact is negative, but it's not as great because you're not actually cutting the hole with the government, and total payrolls in the US together something like 150 million, massive amount of jobs over there, so it's a relatively small portion of the total workforce that's actually affected. But that said, if people start losing their jobs and they're not given the back pay, that group of 750,000 workers not given their back pay, the rough calculation is that that's 0.02% GDP each week. So if you go on for 5 weeks, then you're not 0.1% of GDP directly, so you could have more of an impact. Historically, as I said, it's been 20 since 1976, 20 shutdowns. The average has been 8 days. This one's already gone beyond that. The longest was in 2018, 2019 under Donald Trump. Trump won 34 days. Back on it, the economic impact on the shutdowns has been minor, but the risks are growing. This one could be have a bigger impact because the government has started to lay people off and threaten that they won't get their back pay. We certainly will. It's an interesting time. I mean, Trump is, and I would have thought maybe the strategy was, well, you do all the rough stuff this year, tariffs and so on, but as we came closer and closer into next year, the politics starts to impact again. And he won't be able to do as much if he doesn't get control of the Senate and the House again. It will substantially restrict what he can do. And it's also possible if the Democrats get control of the Senate or the House, they can start inquiries into things. And that he probably doesn't want that to happen either. So it's getting a more interesting time. Trump as we come into next year, given that the midterm elections are now just over a year away.
So watching that, and what happens for the RBA?
And the RBA, well, many Australians with a mortgage have been hoping it's going to get more than just 3 rate cuts. If that's it, then it won't provide a huge boost to spending in the economy, and there's perhaps more risk that households may struggle with their mortgages. But I think so far the evidence suggests they're not. And that's perhaps been helped by the strong jobs market. Get the jobs market weakening, rates haven't come down as much, so you could end up with a somewhat slower recovery than people have been hoping for. But hopefully, I think the RBA will still cut again, but there's just a bit more uncertainty around it at present, given those recent higher than expected inflation numbers.
Well, what's the great deal of interest?
So what's happening in the quiet? And then she could chime into it. Yeah, do hasn't exactly what. Although she did say deal with the relationship and broader she also came together to doing game-changing the shift keeps responsibility like valuation into beaming away from and into the $8.5 chief strategy officer. That's about 13 billion. What's particularly interesting is that she said she can't contact anyone with $1 billion. No one has asked to clarify raise. That's raised alarm in projects. We're now wondering about government oversight. Some of them are renewed it private, but they say they still don't have remember, this is the first time there have been movements before about China pulling government giving it says the issues to report the former head of the question is central and it's one thing to it's another time to watch that because this week we're talking about the his company just jacked up China's dominance trade it's been making classic Trump time cracked the line in about a year from now we'll have 2015 why just $2. And that's where this part of the catch why it's still down both sides pay out we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars foreign buyers this year he sold right and that's what caused the attention that's part of the first wave because early this week assets Australia's got actually one with Trump was he called it a trading relationship linked to White himself. Now that might sound dramatic, and Trump's investigation cut out of nowhere. But the thing to say is that it's actually something back in October, his corporate drama trial failed. Sharing details of one scene of the era of CEO by Gallagher and not a well-deserved someone had a relationship. According to the bankruptcy colleagues, those trials days after once the story came about Gallagher's share price took a hit at the time. Shares were trading I think they're roughly at the trigger. A $90,000 luxury furniture asking to $13 billion White 2 days later, the two Suddenly reports were coming out. This comes after a string of about rights from Santos, including there were stories about other settlements, and so while Gallagher started to run a lot less bad and a lot more bad judgment on board with one said White. She talks back through LinkedIn, the only powerful retailer to let's say they're endowed with nothing and 7 uncovered began $12 million traded. That one we're talking counter-terrorism operations to exist. We've been shown the door. This half the top of former flash by 32%. When they're invested, she walked away with $7 million. Now the full house and yet another one, CEO Anthony Kine, committed after a failed takeover, giving $1,000 investment. We weren't expecting all modest issues by along with nothing exactly like plastic surgery bill. That means the share gets wrong. Why not invested? He sold about $3 So if you're a shareholder, kept selling it all, and just when another 2 million straight with roughly 800 controversy. That's where assets start taking because even though White was CEO, he was still dealing with the company. The question about trading like that, the kind of executive That'd be clear. There's no suggestion Brody broke the law. White he got independently but it's a messy right? Because earlier this month, he was he still gets the same. He basically can't advise unless you give the shareholders what you it's a breakdown. And that's can Richard Wilde throw the
tax break.
So he's a big workers, not a single large-scale nearly all of that help pay down the debt. Health services, and the reason case Marshall, she called it literally taking money out of the pocket to pay their pressure on debt. And I was it's hard to work out. Here's how the numbers power if 70% of staff, including health scholarships, 90% they show a big reaching decisions. Either way, taxpayers between tens of millions of dollars for years and decades. Back in 2015, things were slow too. This is right down there. Despite all the talk government we're just about saying here's a problem. A lot of Australian coal. There's even a new name floating around. So we really need to bring that on the charity gap. Analysts say we have to add around 10 highly controversial. Whether this strategy actually works right now through staff and the public, this is going to be one thing. This one is one of the most unorthodox they've ever had. It's just like 40 and that's the output too. The government knows they're working on Australia's insolvency, by the way, because companies still have to delay record high. Engineering according to instructions to Avaya and Marshall, pointing to a big project that awaited sectors like take part in the government's subsidies that are wearing capacity. Here's what partner according to Bowen, more than 60 the unwind of the project already contract. In other words, and the goal is to have he also said clean engineering has already credited for about 3.2 gigawatts of large-scale capacity. And this could private hospital by December. And to be fair, still elsewhere. And in Australia says that over the past 28 projects in total, about 7 have actually reached commission and run lap, plus there are another 275 projects added around to around $56. About half of those big grid scale batteries, which will be crucial for storing renewable power. There's a cash. AEA says it's taking longer for projects to plan situation. That's because third party services, ownership change, design to integrate batteries onto projects later. When established energy systems something done pretty well. This new data is good. If I do they're the ones now future construction sharing costs and analysts Tristan Green Energy says a positive comes now to rising construction. She says this is a simple fact. We don't have enough transmission. The poles connected to the grid. It's not just about efficiency, it's about unlocking the relations to the bottom up. These young people that means throughout 3 years you're going to have a core with nothing. Those ideas are actually so yeah. And the numbers back up. The ambition is still there. The pipeline is long. The government saying just wait. The economic success. The reality is the clock is ticking right now. Building fast to keep our goals, etc. To their team. And now the even more impressive. The long-running tax started to go away. Tax practitioners building or investigating PWC. Their own AI workflows are streamlined stuff they used to do manually. That's what Microsoft used to the rise of the AWS era. And there are also allegations of dodgy advice and another case as part of the AI advisory for R&D tax breaks. CEO Kevin Burrows has passed 2 years to governance culture, but these fresh inquiries, along with the ongoing investigations, PwC's far over. And over at the Reserve Bank, Michelle sounded a warning about global markets. Yeah, she's worried that investors might be too relaxed about risk. Speaking of this Australian business economist, Bullock said global showing but a little bit of head scratching. Credit spread narrow, risk premiums, and everyone said nothing could go wrong. She warned that if suddenly slips, say shock, and everyone said stability, but actually central banks, the RBA, cut interest rates fast plan. It's interesting. Markets still riding high, fueled by excitement around AI, and some economists call it a potential tech bubble. Bullock didn't go that far, but she did hint that a correction could be painful. She also touched on the jobs market, saying that jump in unemployment 4.5% is surprising, but the overall labour market is still pretty tight. Inflation's sticky, so the balancing act continues. Speaking of balancing, there's a political one happening inside coalition over policy. That's right. Momentum is building among national towards down the party's commitment to net zero by 2050. Around 20 MPs this week, and we've shown polling suggesting most votes want action on emissions, not cost of them personally. Over half said that's not an cost approach. Some of the party, like Queensland Senator Canada, are openly pushing for the coal scrap condition and target altogether. Even Barnaby Joyce did show up at the Nationals meeting, saying he wanted nothing discussion. The debate now is credible while appealing to the cost of living concerns.
Not politically or economically.
So from Trump's tariff plans into a flicker of colour in the US-China trade storm, and Prime Minister now pushed Australia business. It's been a big week on the stage. Back home, hopes for a cut-day rate gone inflation and that's putting real pressure on households. And on Michelle Bullock's next move. We've also seen corporate dramas play out across the board, from Quest to culture and leadership centres, the ongoing special turnaround surrounding YC founder Richard White. Both stories raising the same question. When do government stop being personal, start becoming critical, and it's a sobering reality check. Not a single major project on which one has closed, even as Australia's clean energy targets. The latest in PwC's tax saga, political rumblings over the coalition's climate stand, and it's clear the tension between accountability and affordability isn't going away anytime soon. I'm Leon Gettler, let's talk business this week. Make sure you follow the show wherever you get podcasts. We'll see you next time. And that's it for this week. And next week we'll be talking to Peter Buchanan, VP Managing Director for Asia Pacific, Udemy platform for skill development. And I'll be talking to independents or listeners about the uncertainty of the economic era for the most successful economists and businesses around the world. Subscribe to Talking Business website or whatever your podcast platform is. If you like Talking Business, please review with our podcast. Still 5-star make it easier to find Talking Business. Thank you in advance. In the meantime, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. If you want to contact, email me, leon@leon.com. I answer all emails. Also, my spare time, I have a copywriting business. If anyone needs newsletters, blogs, articles, or editorial, email me. Looking forward to the next episode of Talking Business next week.